She did not slam the door. That is the part nobody ever talks about. When people imagine a moment like that, a moment where the floor opens beneath everything you believed was solid, they imagine noise, screaming, something thrown, some dramatic, satisfying explosion of sound that at least matches the size of what just happened inside your chest. Mirabel Lambert did none of those things. She stood in the doorway of the private study with the winter cloak she had mended herself, folded across her forearms. Needle and thread, 2 evenings of careful work, because she liked doing things for Carl with her hands, liked the ordinary tenderness of it. And she looked at the room in front of her, and she understood, in the space of a single breath, that the life she had been standing on the edge of was gone. The fire was high, for the room was warm, and Leah's arms were around Carl's neck like she had always meant to be there. Leah, her older sister. Dark-haired, sharp-eyed Leah, who had worn deep burgundy to the harvest gathering, where Carl had first found Mirabel, and had laughed at all the right moments, and had positioned herself perfectly in every room she had ever entered, and had spent 24 years being the one their father pointed to with pride. Leah, whose eyes found Mirabel's across the firelight the moment the door swung open. Not with surprise, not with guilt, with the slow, deliberate satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment and finds it arriving exactly on time. Carl turned, and that was when Mirabel's heart stopped asking questions, or because the man who turned toward her was wearing Carl's face and Carl's voice and Carl's body, but his eyes were flat and distant and wrong in a way she had no word for. The way a painting of a person is wrong, technically accurate but missing the entire thing that makes a person real. He looked at her the way you look at an interruption. "This is a private room, Mirabel," he said. "You should go." Behind him, Leah lifted one hand toward her mouth in a gesture of delicate concern that did not reach her eyes. "You really thought it was going to be you," she said softly, and the words were not even sharp. That was the strangest part. They were simply certain. The way a stone wall is certain. Already there. Unmovable. Not constructed to wound. Just stating a fact that had always been true and was only now being confirmed. The Mirabel's wolf, a silver-grey creature she had always kept carefully contained, more inclined toward gentleness than force, more comfortable with stillness than aggression, pressed itself against the inside of her chest and made a sound she wouldn't let out. A sound of pure, structural grief. She stepped backward, then again. Her shoulder found the doorframe. She turned, and she walked, and then she was running, through the corridors of Thornvale Keep, with their ceremony garlands still hanging from the iron sconces, filling the air with a sweetness that now felt like a wound, past the great hall with its silver-draped tables and its pale flowers arranged for tomorrow's celebration, past the careful, beautiful architecture of a future she had let herself want quietly for 3 months. But in the private way she wanted everything, carefully, without certainty, as if wanting something too loudly might cause it to disappear. It had disappeared anyway. The outer doors were open, the courtyard was cold, the forest beyond the gate was dark and deep and asked nothing of her. She ran until the castle lights dissolved behind the tree line. She ran until her lungs refused another step. She went down at the base of an old pine, with her back against the bark, and the folded winter cloak still somehow in her hands, and she sat there in the dark and let herself break in the only way she ever allowed herself to break, quietly, privately, without an audience. She did not know, sitting at the base of that tree, that she was already carrying his sons. She did not know that Carl Haskins would wake before dawn, reaching for her across empty air, disoriented and afraid, with no memory of the evening's latter hours. She did not know that the man she had seen in that firelit room had never been Carl at all. She only knew what her eyes had shown her, and her eyes had been given a lie so precise, so carefully built, that it would cost them both 5 years. Dulan's Cove did not appear on official maps. This had been when Mirabel first found it. 6 weeks pregnant, moving on foot along the coastal road, choosing directions based primarily on which way the wind was blowing and which paths looked least traveled. The entire point. It sat between two cliff faces, above a harbor so small that the fishing boats moored there had to be anchored in a single line rather than spread out, each one nestled against the next like a row of sleeping animals. The single road in flooded for 3 months of every winter. The people who lived there had developed, over several generations, the particular self-sufficiency of communities that had learned the hard way that no one was coming to help them, and had decided they preferred it that way. They had been cautious of her, at first. A young woman arriving alone with no family, no explanation, no pack affiliation, and a look in her eyes like someone who had recently survived something that had no name. Dulan's Cove had been polite and watchful, and had made no promises. It took one night to change that. Old Clyde Dulan's daughter-in-law had gone into labor 6 weeks early in the worst storm the harbor had seen in a decade. Or the midwife from the neighboring town could not get through. The road was flooded, the water was rising, and the only person who stepped forward was the quiet, pale-faced stranger who had been sleeping in the back room of the harbor inn for 2 weeks and had not yet given anyone a reason to trust her. Mirabel had not slept that night. She had not eaten. She had worked from memory and instinct, and the specific knowledge her mother had passed down like a language, the knowledge of what a laboring body needs before it can tell you itself. She had talked the younger woman through the worst of it, and caught the child with her own hands at 3 in the morning, with the storm battering the walls and the lamp guttering and her own heart somewhere in her throat. The baby had cried immediately, loud and furious and perfect. By morning, what Dulan's Cove had decided she was theirs. That had been 5 years ago. Now Mirabel Hobbs, the name she had borrowed from her closest friend here, the woman who had taken her in when the inn grew too expensive, who had become in those 5 years the closest thing she had to a sister worth keeping, was so woven into the fabric of this place that the town itself seemed to exhale when she walked through it. Her cottage sat at the north end of the lane, stone-built, practical, with a garden that had grown more elaborate with every passing year as she discovered she had inherited her mother's instinct for growing things. Dried herbs hung in dense bundles from the rafters inside, lavender and feverfew, yarrow and a dozen others, filling the rooms with a layered fragrance that her sons had grown up associating with safety. Her hands bore the permanent stain of 5 years of healing work. She was good at it. Not through discipline alone, but through some combination of skill and instinct and genuine care for the person in front of her that made people trust her before she had done anything to earn it. Pregnant women requested her months in advance. Children sat still for her when they sat still for no one else. Old men who refused to see healers sent their wives to fetch her instead, as a compromise that preserved their dignity and still got them seen. She had built something real here. She was proud of it in the particular way she was proud of things she never let herself examine too closely, because examining it too closely brought her near the grief of everything that had come before. What the twins were in the garden when she stepped outside with her morning tea. Isaac was crouching at the far edge of the vegetable beds, completely still, watching something in the undergrowth with the focused intensity that had been characteristic of him since birth. 7 years old. Storm-dark eyes, small and compact and self-appointed protector of this household since he learned to walk, which in practical terms meant that every stranger's approach was a potential threat to be assessed. Every unfamiliar sound in the night was worth investigating from the top of the stairs with small fists clenched. He had his father's eyes. Mirabel had long since learned to absorb this the way you absorb a scar. It was simply part of the landscape, a feature rather than an emergency. But in unguarded moments, or when the morning light caught Isaac at a particular angle, she felt it like pressure behind her sternum, the ghost of something she had chosen to bury and could not entirely keep buried. Wyatt was a different matter entirely. If Isaac was winter, careful, contained, grey, watchful, Wyatt was late afternoon, warm, golden, extravagantly generous with himself. He was running circuits around the garden with his arms stretched wide, trying to catch the salt air off the harbour, singing something in a melody he was inventing as he went, his dark curls flying. Amber-brown eyes that lit up when they found his mother's, with the uncomplicated joy of a child who had decided the world was fundamentally trustworthy and saw no evidence yet to revise this view. He had his father's laugh. Mirabel had worked very hard not to think about that one. "Mama, there's something in the lavender," Isaac reported without looking up. "Is it bothering you?" "No, I'm gathering data." Wyatt abandoned his circuits and came to press himself against her side, warm and solid and smelling of sleep. "Can we go to the harbour market today?" Pearl Finch said her father caught something enormous. "How enormous?" She held her arms out this wide. He demonstrated, nearly taking the tea from her hand. "Maybe wider." "We'll see." It was a good morning. Most mornings here were good in the quiet way that ordinary mornings are good, without drama, without ceremony, but in ways you might fail to appreciate if you hadn't spent long enough learning to appreciate them. The trouble arrived mid-afternoon. Bess Turlough passed through Dulan's Cove twice a year, but always stopping at Mirabel's cottage to trade northern herbs for news from the capital roads. She was a comfortable woman, easy laughing, the kind of person who made a room feel inhabited, and she sat at the kitchen table and drank her tea and talked about the harvest season and the road conditions and a strange early frost moving down from the northern territories. Then, setting down her cup, she mentioned the scouts. Royal colours, she said, moving through the harbour villages, asking about a woman who had travelled alone with 2 small children approximately 5 years past. A healer. No pack affiliation. Paying good coin for solid information. "Any idea who they want?" Mirabel asked. Her voice was level. Her hands were very still on her own cup. Bess shrugged. "Missing Lord's daughter, they say. But the coin doesn't fit a lord's business. That's a king's search." She left an hour later, cheerful, unaware. Mirabel stood at the worktop for a long time without moving. She had been careful. She had changed her name. She had avoided pack networks and capital roads, and any contact with anyone from her former life. She had chosen this place specifically because it didn't appear on maps. She had been so careful for so long that the carefulness had become invisible, just the way she moved through the world. But the scouts were getting closer. She could feel it the way her wolf felt, approaching weather. Not as a thought, but as something physical settling at the back of her throat. Something in the heightened alertness of the creature that lived beneath her skin. Patient, silver-grey. Beginning, very quietly, to wake up. That evening, She put the boys to bed and stood at the window for a long time. The village lane was dark and quiet. The mountain road was pale in the dark. The harbour below was still. 2 choices. Pack what mattered most, take the children, find another Dulan's Cove. She had done it once. She knew how. Or stay. Her hands found the window frame. She pressed her palms flat against the wood. And she thought about Clyde Dulan's granddaughter, born in this cottage, the first hands to hold her being Mirabel's hands. She thought about the family on the South Lane who had survived last winter's fever outbreak because she had been there every night for 8 days. She thought about Isaac watching the road in the evenings when he thought she wasn't looking, with that careful grey stillness that said he had rooted himself here in ways that mattered to him. But for the first time in 5 years, she did not immediately reach for the option that meant running. She stayed at the window until the lamp burned low. Not yet, she told herself. Wait and see who comes. The scouts reached the edge of Dulan's Cove on a grey Tuesday morning, and it was Isaac who spotted them first. He came to find her at the herb garden, without hurrying, without alarm on his face, with the settled calm of a child who has learned that panic is a waste of energy better spent on information. 2 men at the harbour market, he said. Asking questions. Their clothes are too good for traders. Mirabel straightened. What kind of questions? I couldn't hear, but Pearl Finch's father looked uncomfortable after they talked to him. She went inside and stood in the middle of the kitchen without moving for a moment. Wyatt was on the floor with a piece of rope he had been trying to knot all morning. He looked up at her with those warm, amber eyes, read something in her face, and quietly set the rope down. Is something wrong? He asked. Not yet, she said. Stay close to the cottage today. Both of you. Isaac accepted this without question. Wyatt accepted it, because Isaac did. That afternoon, Valerie Hobbs, whose name Mirabel had borrowed 5 years ago, and who had become, unexpectedly, one of the realest things in her life, came through the back door with a look on her face that confirmed what Mirabel had already begun to suspect. 3 separate people have told me the same thing, Valerie said, pulling out a chair. The description they're using is specific enough to be a problem. I know. I can hide you at my family's property up the cliff road, the boys too. No one would think to. No. Valerie stopped. I spent 5 years becoming someone, Mirabel said quietly. I am not going to disappear again because someone is looking. Valerie studied her across the table. Then, slowly, she nodded. Then you'd better figure out who is looking and why, before they decide for you. After Valerie left, Mirabel sat at the kitchen table alone and allowed herself to do the thing she hadn't done properly in 5 years. She let herself remember Carl, not the man in the firelit room with the flat eyes and the stranger's voice, not the image she had carried out of Thornvale Keep like a stone pressed against her sternum. The real one, or the one who had crossed a crowded room at the harvest gathering of the northern houses, past Leah in her deep burgundy silk, past every woman who had positioned herself to be noticed, and walked directly to the far window, where Mirabel was pretending to be interested in the rain. She had been the second daughter of Lord Resno Lambert, a minor lord whose name opened doors, but whose warmth never followed anyone through them. Mirabel had grown up being the one her father looked at with mild expectation rather than the pride, the one who was competent and quiet and never quite the point of any room she entered. Carl Haskins had walked up to her at a gathering where she was making herself small and said, to simply, "You look like someone who made peace with the evening before it started." She had said, "I find rooms easier when I stop trying to belong in them." He had laughed, not the polished, performative kind, a real one, surprised out of him, like laughter that hadn't expected to happen. He had stayed beside her until the gathering ended. 3 months of letters had followed, written in his own hand. She had known because it was slightly uneven on the left side, the mark of someone who had learned to write while holding something else in the other hand. 3 months of walks that wandered longer than planned because neither of them wanted to be the one to say they should probably turn back. Conversations that kept finding more to say. The specific and startling joy of discovering that someone understood what you meant before you had finished meaning it. Her wolf had recognized something in him from the beginning. Something steady, something that did not need to announce itself because it simply was. She had not trusted her own instincts since the night she left. She had concluded, somewhere in the long first year, that her ability to read people was simply broken, that the thing she had been so certain of had been a fantasy her loneliness constructed. Sitting at the kitchen table 5 years later, in the grey afternoon light, with the sound of her sons moving quietly upstairs, she turned the memory over in her hands like something she had found at the bottom of a drawer and was not certain she had permission to keep. She had never stopped believing he was capable of it, that was the part that had cost her the most sleep. Not the heartbreak, the doubt. Because she had loved Carl Haskins with the careful, private certainty of a woman who did not give that word away easily. And loving him while also believing he had looked at her from across a firelit room with cold, indifferent eyes and told her she was simply not worth choosing. That contradiction had sat in her chest for 5 years, like a splinter she could not reach. She closed the memory before it could go any further. The scouts were at the harbour market. Someone was looking. She would know soon enough who had sent them. She pressed her hands flat on the table and made herself breathe. Whatever comes, she told herself, you are not the girl who ran. You are not her anymore. Carl Haskins had followed 41 leads in 5 years. He knew the number exactly, because Ephraim Brock kept a ledger, not to document failure, but because Ephraim was the kind of man who believed that precision was a form of respect, and every lead they had followed represented someone's life, someone's information, someone's risk. 41 entries. 41 villages or towns or harbour settlements where she had not been, and each one had cost him something small and irreplaceable from the supply of certainty he was rationing very carefully. He was leaner than he had been. Not diminished, sharpened. The way things are sharpened when they are used continuously against difficult surfaces for a long time. Ephraim rode beside him on the cliff road above Dulan's Cove, and neither of them spoke for a while. Below, the harbour town materialized in the pale morning light. Smoke from chimneys, the fishing boats in their single moored line, the small brave ordinariness of a place that had decided to survive on its own terms. This one is different, Ephraim said. Not a question. The specificity, Carl said. Every false lead was vague. This one has detail. A midwife, 2 children, approximately 7 years old. Arrived alone 5 years ago. No pack, no family claimed, no past offered. She had given a borrowed name, but kept her own first name. And Carl understood that. Understood it in the way you understand the things people cannot quite bring themselves to let go of, even when letting go would be safer. What do you say to her? Ephraim asked. Carl kept his eyes on the road descending toward the harbour. The truth. All of it. From the beginning. She may not want to hear it. That is her right. And if knowing isn't enough? Carl was quiet for a long moment. Then I leave, and I go knowing she is alive and safe, which is more than I have had for 5 years. Ephraim studied him sideways, Then he turned back to the road and said nothing else. They descended into Dulan's Cove as the morning harbour market was beginning to close. Carl's 4 soldiers, led by steady, reliable Ralph Richmond, who had been with him since the first month of the search, fanned out with the quiet professionalism of men who understood their role here was presence, not prominence. Carl saw her before she saw him, a woman emerging from the cottage at the north end of the lane, stepping out with a basket over one arm, stopping at the sound of horses on the road, going completely still. She had changed. 5 years had taken whatever soft uncertainty had lived around her edges and replaced it with something that held its own shape, regardless of what pressed against it. She stood in the lane with the particular composure of someone who has been tested thoroughly and found sufficient, not hard, not cold, but absolutely certain of where the ground was beneath her feet. She was more herself than she had been the night of the ceremony. This struck him as both right and devastating in equal measure. Their eyes met across the distance. She did not flinch. She did not run. She had been bracing for this. He could see it in the stillness of her. Not surprise, but the controlled management of something she had already calculated. He dismounted. He crossed half the distance between them. He stopped. Mirabel. Her name left him rough at the edges, stripped of every composed thing he had prepared to say. He had planned something measured, something that gave her space, something that demonstrated he understood the situation, required patience. Instead, her name came out the way things do when they have been held under pressure for too long, unguarded, raw, carrying 5 years of everything he had not been permitted to say. She absorbed it without blinking. "You need to leave. I have been looking for you. Then you have wasted 5 years. Her voice was flat, certain. "I have nothing to say to you. I want you off this road. Give me one conversation. Not a command. Not a king's request. Just a man's. If you still want me gone afterward, I will go. I will not come back." She calculated. He could see it. Not whether to believe him, but whether she could afford to refuse, whether the answer she needed was somewhere in whatever he had come to say. Before she could speak, a small figure appeared from the direction of the harbour lane. Isaac. 7 years old, compact and watchful, moving with the deliberate steadiness of a child who has appointed himself the last line of defence of his household. Storm-dark eyes, small fists, and an expression on his face that was so precisely, heartbreakingly familiar that Carl went completely still. He was looking at himself. Not a copy. His own nature, translated through this child who had never met him, arrived at independently through whatever inheritance of character runs deeper than memory. "Leave my mother alone," Isaac said. Not loudly, with simple, serious authority that expected to be taken seriously because it had always been. Carl crouched slowly, bringing himself below the boy's eye level. "I am not here to harm her," he said. "I give you my word." Isaac studied him with those storm-dark eyes. "My mother says words are just the beginning of things. Actions are what matter." Something moved through Carl's chest. Grief, wonder, the specific ache of encountering a child who carries your own nature in a face you have never seen before. "Your mother is right," he said quietly. "I intend to prove that." A long pause. Isaac looked at his mother, back at Carl. Then he stepped aside. Not warmly, but he stepped aside. Mirabel watched all of this with an expression that gave nothing away. She told him the terms without softening them. 1 week. He would stay in the town, not in her home. He would not approach her sons without her permission. He would not invoke his title or his authority within Dulan's Cove. He agreed to every condition before she had finished stating them. She turned and walked back to the cottage. At the doorway she paused for just a moment, a pause so brief it might have meant nothing. But she stopped, and that stopping was something. Carl stood in the lane until she had gone inside. Then he turned to Ephraim, who was watching from a careful distance with the expression of a man carefully maintaining neutrality. "The boy has my eyes," Carl said. "I noticed," Ephraim said. They set up camp at the south end of town. Ralph coordinated with old Clyde Dulan rather than asserting anything. The soldiers were quiet and stayed out of the way. Of that evening, Carl sat on the harbour wall and watched the lights come on in the cottage windows, one by one, as the sun dropped behind the cliff face and the town settled into the particular peace of a place that has always known how to rest. He had been half of himself for 5 years. He was not going to rush this. He understood what was required here. Patience, proof, the slow and unconditional demonstration that the man she had seen in that firelit room was not who he was. He had waited 5 years. He knew how to wait. The week settled into something Mirabel had not expected. She had expected difficulty. She had expected to spend every day managing herself against the gravitational pull of his proximity, white-knuckling the anger and the grief and the 5-year accumulation of everything she had built on the foundation of what she thought she had seen. What she had not expected was the quiet. He did not push. He did not remind her of the deadline she had set. He did not invoke what he was or what he could offer. He simply moved through the edges of Dulan's Cove with the careful, deliberate restraint of a man who understood that the space between them required her permission before he entered it. On the second morning, he repaired the cracked railing on Clyde Dulan's dock without being asked and without announcing it. Clyde noticed, said nothing to Carl directly. Told Valerie. Valerie told Mirabel with a face carefully arranged to reveal nothing. Mirabel said nothing either. Wyatt found Carl on the harbour wall that same afternoon. This was not a surprise. Wyatt had never encountered a stranger he did not consider a potential friend, and he operated on the settled confidence of someone who had never been made to feel his attention was unwelcome. He sat beside Carl without introduction and looked out at the water. "What are you looking at?" "The water," Carl said. "What are you looking for in it?" A pause. "Something I lost." Wyatt considered this with the gravity he brought to anything that struck him as genuinely interesting. "Isaac is good at finding things," he said finally. "You should ask him." Carl laughed. Mirabel heard it from the cottage doorway, where she had been standing with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. A real laugh, surprised out of him, unguarded, exactly the laugh she had stored in the private part of herself she refused to visit, or something shifted in her chest with a small and painful click. She went back inside. On the 4th day, Isaac approached Carl in the early afternoon with his arms at his sides, and one question. "Did you make my mother cry?" "Yes," Carl said. "Once. I have regretted it every day since." Isaac was quiet. The harbour wind moved between them. "You can't always fix the things you break," he said. "No," Carl agreed, "but you can spend the rest of your life making sure it doesn't break any further." Another long silence. Something in Isaac's expression shifted. Not warmth, not yet, but a small and honest recalibration, like a door that has not opened but has stopped being locked. "All right," Isaac said. "Nothing more." He turned and walked back toward the cottage. The conversation Mirabel had agreed to give him happened on the 4th evening. She found him on the harbour wall as the sun went behind the cliff face and the water turned from gold to grey. She sat at the other end of it, enough distance that it was shared space, not proximity. "Tell me what you think happened that night," she said. He told her. Her father's invitation, delivered 2 days before the ceremony. "Come have a drink with me. Welcome to the family. Let's bury the stiffness between us for your daughter's sake." The wine that had tasted faintly wrong, sweet where it should have been dry, slightly heavy, the kind of wrong you only identify when it is already inside you. The growing difficulty of thought, the way the room had become slow, the gap, hours of it, no memory, no continuity, waking in the east corridor with his boots still on, and a dread climbing his spine that he could not explain, or he had gone immediately to find her. Her rooms were empty. Her father was waiting in the corridor with a story already smooth and cold. Mirabel had been discovered plotting against the crown. She had fled before she could be confronted. There were witnesses, 3 of them, all later discovered, after months of investigation, to have been paid from Lord Resno Lambert's private accounts. "I did not believe him," Carl said. "Not for a single moment. But you were gone, and every official channel told the same story, and I had no proof of anything except that what he was describing was not the woman I knew." Mirabel looked at the water. "So you searched?" "I searched." His voice was level, not asking for anything, simply stating what had been. "For 5 years. 41 leads. I followed 17 of them personally." She said nothing for a long time. Then Ephraim arrived from his most recent investigation, and what he carried changed the texture of the air in the cottage permanently. A ledger. Recovered from Resno Lambert's sealed financial records by a contact in the capital who had been working toward this discovery for months. Ephraim set it on the kitchen table without ceremony and stepped back. Mirabel read it with Carl standing behind her, both of them silent. The entries were worse than anything she had imagined. Not because they were cruel, because they were ordinary. The cost of the impersonation, itemized. The name of the hired shifter, Marmon Conway. Specialized in physical mimicry. Engaged for 1 evening. Payment released upon confirmed separation. Notes on the hired witnesses. Their names. The amounts paid. The specific testimony they had been given to memorize. And then a line that stopped her breath entirely. M expected to withdraw upon visual confirmation. Emotional state will ensure she does not linger long enough to question what she has seen. L positioned as preferred candidate. Succession to fall to Lambert blood within the year. Her daughter's devastation, scheduled in advance. Her departure, anticipated and planned for. Her 5 years, budgeted into a strategy. She closed the ledger. "My father," she said. Not a question. Not fury yet. The fury would come, but it would come later. Privately, when she was alone. Right now there was just the word, landing in the room like something dropped from a great height, while she stood up from the table and went to the window, and stood there with her hands at her sides until she could breathe normally again. Carl did not come to stand beside her. He did not fill the silence or offer comfort she had not asked for. He simply remained where he was, present, patient, asking nothing. After a long time, she turned from the window. "Come to dinner tomorrow," she said. "The boys should get used to seeing you before anything else is decided." She walked out of the kitchen. Behind her, she heard him exhale. A single, controlled breath, the kind that comes after something very large has been held very carefully for a very long time. She kept walking, but at the bottom of the stairs, she paused, her hand on the wall, and closed her eyes. Something inside her, the part she had sealed off, or the part she had been guarding for 5 years with everything she had, was beginning, very quietly, to breathe again. She was not ready for that yet. But she could not stop it either. Chapter 5. She came shaking. She arrived before the harbour had woken up. Grey morning, the tide going out, the lane empty and still. Mirabel heard the knock and stood in the kitchen for a moment before answering it, because she had learned in 5 years to trust the feeling in the base of her throat when something required preparation. She opened the door. Leah Lambert stood on the step in a travelling cloak that had been through hard weather and worse roads, her dark hair loose around her face in a way Mirabel had never once seen in 24 years of shared life. Leah was a woman who maintained control of her appearance the way other people maintained control of their breathing, automatically, without thinking, as if the alternative had never occurred to her. Her hands were shaking. In 2 decades of knowing her sister, Mirabel had never seen her hands shake. Not at their mother's funeral. Not at the worst social performances their father had ever staged. Not in any moment of difficulty or crisis or grief. They were shaking now. She looked like someone who had travelled for days on no sleep and had arrived at a door she was not certain she had the right to knock on. Mirabel stood in the doorway and waited. "Give me one reason to let you through this door," she said. Leah reached into her cloak and produced a leather satchel. "Because father is 4 days behind me with hired soldiers, and I am the only person who knows exactly how many, and from where, and under whose command. And if you don't hear me in the next 10 minutes, the information loses value with every hour." Mirabel stood aside. She let her in. Carl was already at the kitchen table. She had sent word early that morning, before Leah knocked, because some part of her wolf had been awake before dawn, with the particular alertness that precedes arrivals. He was there when they came in, and he looked at Leah with an expression that was careful and controlled, and gave nothing of what was happening behind it. Leah set the satchel on the table and didn't look at him. She looked at Mirabel. "The letters are in order by date," she said. "The earliest ones document the arrangement with Marmon Conway. The later ones document the payment structure for the witnesses. The final entries—" She stopped, swallowed. "The final entries are his projections, what he expected to happen once the transition was complete." Mirabel opened the satchel and read in silence. The letters were her father's handwriting. She had known it since childhood, the precise, controlled script of a man who wrote with economy because he considered brevity a form of authority. The tone throughout was the same, measured, strategic. The way a man writes when he is planning something he considers entirely reasonable. The detail that landed heaviest was not the conspiracy itself. It was how early it had begun, how long before the ceremony he had set the pieces in motion, how little he had needed Leah to do. Just stand in a room. Just hold still. Just let Mirabel see what she was meant to see and believe what she was meant to believe. She closed the last letter. "You knew," she said. "You knew the man was not him." "Yes." The word was the simplest thing Leah had said. It sat in the room and did not move. "You stood there," Mirabel said, "and you watched my face, and you held the door open." "Yes." No deflection, no rushing toward explanation. She sat with the accountability first, and the honesty of it was harder to look at than anger would have been. Then, quietly, I had spent my entire life being the one our father pointed to. I had decided somewhere along the way that I deserved everything I wanted, and I wanted Carl, and father told me you would be placed elsewhere, that no real damage would follow, and you believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. Her voice went flat with self-knowledge. I stopped believing him within a year, and by then you were gone, and I had no way to find you, and I told myself it was too late to undo. It was never too late, Mirabel said. You chose not to look. Leah did not argue. Yes, she said simply. So I did. Silence settled over the kitchen. Outside, Wyatt was singing to himself in the garden. Isaac was somewhere near the road. The morning was ordinary around the edges of something that was not ordinary at all. Mirabel looked at her sister for a long time, looked at the woman who had shared her childhood and her father's house and 24 years of life, who had made the worst choice available to her in the worst moment, who had sat with the consequences for 5 years in a silence that had clearly cost her something too. She didn't forgive her. Forgiveness was not available here yet. It lived somewhere far ahead, down a road they had not walked, but the door stayed open. You will remain here under guard, Mirabel said. You will give us everything, every name, every route, every detail about who Resno hired and what their orders are. You will not be alone with my sons at any point. She let that land. If you betray us, I will handle that myself. Do you understand what I mean by that? Yes, Leah said. Then stay. She turned to Carl. He had been quiet through all of it. She had felt him listening, the particular quality of attention she had memorized long before she had understood what it would cost her to lose it. Now he met her eyes across the table, and what was on his face was not triumph or vindication. It was grief, simple and unguarded. Not the grief of someone who has been proved right about something they desperately wished they had been wrong about. Tell me what we need to do, she said. Together, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Together. Chapter 6. What she became. 3 days. That was what Leah's intelligence gave them. They used every hour. Carl's soldiers, working from Leah's precise knowledge of Gundred Turlough's tactical patterns, restructured the town's defensive perimeter around the single cliff road. Choke points at the 3 narrowest stretches of the descent. Supply caches in the sea caves above the harbour. Clear evacuation routes for Clyde Dulan's families, for the elderly, for every household that needed to be somewhere else before Turlough's hired force reached the valley. Leah's information was invaluable, and she knew Gundred Turlough's preferences. Aggressive early, overconfident in numbers, his personal command position kept far enough from any engagement that disrupting his front line would take time to register with him. She knew that roughly a quarter of Resno's hired soldiers had signed on within the last 6 weeks, and that recent hires in her father's experience scattered when payment became uncertain. She knew exactly where Resno himself would be. Not at the front. Never at the front. Behind the supply wagons, protected, watching through someone else's risk. Mirabel worked alongside all of it. Not because she was unafraid. She was afraid, steadily and specifically, in the way she was afraid during difficult deliveries when the margin for error narrowed to nothing. But fear and action were not mutually exclusive. She had learned that in this cottage, in this harbour town, in 5 years of being the only person responsible for everything that mattered to her, you moved through the fear in order to reach what was on the other side of it. The morning before Turlough's expected arrival, she knelt in front of her boys. Isaac stood very straight. He had been tracking the preparations from a careful distance for 3 days, absorbing everything, saying very little. Now he met her eyes with those storm-dark irises, and waited. "Are you going to fight?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She did not soften it. He was a child who needed truth more than comfort, and she had always respected that in him, even when it made things harder. He squared his shoulders, a small, precise, adult gesture on a 7-year-old frame that very nearly undone her composure entirely. "But I will take care of Wyatt," he said, "until you come back. I know you will." Wyatt pressed himself against her side. "Mama, I'm scared. I know, my love." She pulled him close, pressed her face into his curls. "Being scared and being in danger are not the same thing. You will be safe. Ephraim will be with you. I will come the moment it is over." She held them both for a long time, all three of them, shaking. She did not manage it or move past it. She let the shaking be what it was. Then she stood up, and she went to do what needed doing. Gundred Turlough's force came over the cliff road at first light, 60 shapes in the grey dawn, moving with the confidence of men who had been told the numbers were in their favour and had believed it without looking at the terrain. The first wave hit the choke points hard and scattered into a messier, to slower engagement than Turlough had planned. Mirabel fought at the perimeter. 5 years of lifting and building and hauling, and the daily physical reality of raising 2 children alone had made her body something she had not designed it to be. Strong, efficient, enduring. And her understanding of anatomy, built entirely for healing, translated under pressure into a precision she had never trained for, but discovered in herself nonetheless. She knew where joints gave, where pressure produced pain without lasting damage, where the human body was honest about its limits. She moved through the engagement with the focus of someone who could not afford to lose. It was Wyatt's voice that stopped her, high and alarmed from the direction of the sea cave where Ephraim had taken them. She would have known that voice in any amount of noise, or in any crowd, in any darkness. She was running before the thought finished forming. The cave entrance was forced open. Inside, her father stood in the center of the space, as if he had arranged this meeting personally. Lord Resno Lambert, dressed carefully, unhurried, Isaac's collar in his fist, the boy pulling against his grip with everything he had, face white, furious, completely focused on the problem in front of him, rather than the fear underneath it. "Mirabel," her father said, her name warm in his mouth, the way it was always warmest when he believed he had already won. "Come in. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Isaac's eyes found hers. He was not frightened of her. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, with concentrated, complete attention, waiting, trusting her to decide correctly. The sight of him, 7 years old, his grandfather's hand on his collar, still pulling, still fighting, still refusing to stop, pressed itself against her chest like a hand laid flat. Her wolf moved. Not the way it had moved before. The brief, instinctive surges she had been containing and redirecting for 5 years. This was different. This was the full accumulated weight of 5 years of patience reaching its limit simultaneously, with 5 years of grief and love and the specific, clarifying fury of a mother standing between her child and the person who has decided to use him. The shift, when it came, was total. Bones remapping, muscles following. A release so complete and overwhelming it was almost like relief. 5 years of confinement exhaling in a single, enormous breath. She landed on 4 legs between her sons and her father, or silver grey, larger than her human form by a margin that filled the space, and fully, completely present in a way she hadn't been since the night she left Thornvale Keep. Lord Resno Lambert stumbled backward against the cave wall. The composure he had maintained across 30 years of careful maneuvering cracked, visibly, for the first time. He had built the entire architecture of his plan on the assumption that she was manageable. The second daughter. The quiet one. The one who withdrew when pressed, who ran when frightened, who could be positioned and redirected and placed wherever was most convenient. He had forgotten she had a wolf. He had never understood that quiet is not the same as empty, that patience is not the same as powerlessness. Her wolf was neither empty nor powerless. Reznor opened his mouth. She moved forward one step. He stopped. Isaac was free. Reznor had released him the moment she shifted, and her son was at her side now, his small hand finding the fur at her shoulder and resting there. Not frightened. Present. Steady. She could end this. The knowledge was clear and present and factual, the way anatomy is factual. She was aware of it, the way she was aware of her own heartbeat. Isaac's hand on her shoulder. His storm-dark eyes. She thought about what she wanted those eyes to have witnessed 30 years from now, when he was a man who had grown from this moment. She shifted back. She stood in human form over her father, her hands at her sides, her breathing even. You will spend the rest of your life stripped of every title and every acre you built on other people's damage, she said. You will watch everything you tried to take go to the people you tried to destroy. And you will live knowing that I had the choice in front of me, and I chose something better than what you would have done in my place. She stepped back. Carl was in the cave entrance. He had come through behind her, quietly, giving her the space to finish what was hers to finish. His soldiers moved past her and took Reznor Lambert into custody with the calm, precise efficiency of men who had been waiting for exactly this. Mirabel looked at her father being led out of the cave and felt, beneath the fury and the grief and the long, complicated weight of it all, something she had not expected. A door closing. Not with violence, not with satisfaction, with the quiet, final click of something that has been open too long being properly shut. She turned to find her sons. Wyatt was at the back of the cave, eyes enormous, arms already out. She crossed to him and gathered them both. Wyatt warm and immediate, Isaac slightly more contained, but leaning in, his face against her shoulder. All three of them shaking. She let it happen. Carl stood at the cave entrance and watched, and did not intrude on it. And she was grateful, in that moment, for exactly that. For the particular grace of a man who understood when to give space and when to fill it. Chapter 7. The choosing Dulan's Cove found its peace, not the held-breath quiet of before, the watchful kind, the waiting kind, but the genuine peace of a place returning to its own rhythms after something large has moved through it. Reznor Lambert and Turlough's remaining hired soldiers were taken toward the capital under Carl's authority. Marmon Conway, the shifter who had worn Carl's face on the night of the ceremony, had already agreed to full testimony in exchange for reduced charges. Ephraim had been working toward that disclosure for months. The conspiracy was being dismantled publicly and methodically. Leah healed. On the third morning after the battle, before the harbour was fully awake, she left. No long farewell. No ceremony. Mirabel watched from the window as her sister walked the cliff road in the early light with her travelling bag, and the particular posture of someone who has decided something and intends to follow through with it. She did not go after her. She had said what needed saying. Not yet was not the same as never. The rest was Leah's work to do, and Mirabel could not do it for her. Carl handled the official business efficiently during the daylight hours. In the evenings, he was simply present. He sat with the boys in the late afternoons without crowding them. He brought news from the capital when Mirabel asked for it. He fixed things around the cottage and around Clyde Dulan's dock with the quiet consistency of someone demonstrating, without narrating it, that he intended to be worth the space he was taking up. He did not push. He did not invoke the resolution of everything they had survived as leverage for anything. Wyatt adopted him on the second day of the aftermath. This was not a negotiated outcome. Wyatt simply decided, with the absolute unself-conscious confidence he brought to everything, that Carl was his, and adjusted his daily schedule accordingly. He brought Carl rocks and lengths of rope and several drawings that were, allegedly, the harbour. Carl received all of it with the complete seriousness of a man who understood instinctively that the gift was the gesture, not the object. Isaac took longer. On the fourth morning he appeared in front of Carl with his arms at his sides, and said without preamble, "Will you show me how to hold a blade properly? The man at the market showed me, but his grip was wrong." Carl blinked once. Then, "Yes, absolutely." They spent an hour on it. The grip, the angle, the shoulder alignment, the patience required to do the small thing correctly before attempting the large thing. Isaac absorbed every correction without resistance, which Carl mentioned to Ephraim later, was the mark of someone who would eventually be genuinely skilled at whatever they decided to pursue. Afterward, Isaac set the training blade down carefully and considered for a moment. "You are not completely terrible," he said. "Thank you," Carl said, with the gravity the statement deserved. "That matters to me considerably. You can eat with us tonight if you want." "I would like that." He ate with them that night and the next. Mirabel watched it happen the way you watch a wound close, with relief that is complicated by the acute memory of how long you were in pain. The boys were not performing acceptance for her benefit. Isaac was not warming to Carl because she seemed to want him to. He was not that kind of person. He was warming because something in his own careful assessment had shifted to something honest, and the honesty of it made the thing she had been managing for 5 years considerably harder to keep managing. On the 7th evening, she went to the lighthouse at the edge of the cliff without asking Carl to come. He came anyway. They stood for a while without speaking. The water was dark below the cliff face. The town lights were small and warm behind them. The harbour was quiet. The road was empty. "I wanted to hate you," she said finally. Not an accusation, just a fact, offered without wrapping. "When I left, hating you was the only thing that made the leaving make sense. If you had been exactly what I thought I saw, then leaving was right. And I was protecting myself and my children. And the life I built was built on a choice I made clearly." He said nothing. She could feel him listening, actually, the way he had always listened, without waiting for his turn. "Isaac was born in a storm," she said. "A borrowed room. No one who loved me in it. I held them both in the middle of the night in a place I had lived for 3 weeks, and I felt the love and the grief arrive at the exact same moment, and I could not separate them, and I decided I would build something from both. The wind came off the water. She let it. I tried to stop loving you for 2 full years," she said. "Isaac was born with your eyes, and I tried to be angry about it, and I could not. Wyatt laughs the way you laugh, and I tried to be angry about that too, and I could not do that either. I tried to make the hating work, because the loving was easier to live with when I believed it had been a mistake. And it was not a mistake." He turned toward her slowly. She felt the movement more than saw it. "Mirabel, if I say something and you respond badly, I will not forgive you for it. Tell me." "I love you," she said. "I loved you before I left. I loved you through 5 years of deliberately not thinking about you. I love you now, and I tried to stop, and I am not able to stop, and I am—" She exhaled. "I am also very relieved." He lifted his hand and touched her face with the same gentleness she had stored in the private place she had refused to visit. Palm warm against her cheek, thumb light at her cheekbone, the same gesture carrying 5 years of everything between then and now. "I love you," he said, "or I have not stopped loving you for one single day of the past 5 years." The mate bond settled between them, not with ceremony, not with thunder or light or any of the dramatic arrivals the old stories described. It arrived the way warmth arrives in a room when someone finally lights the fire after a long, cold evening, quietly, thoroughly, from the edges inward, until the cold that had been the room's entire character was simply, finally, gone. She felt his love as clearly as her own heartbeat, his relief, enormous, 5 years' worth of it, his grief for the time they could not reclaim, and beneath all of it, deeper than either, stronger than both, a joy so completely unguarded, it felt like something she had never encountered in him before. Because it was. The specific joy of someone who has waited so long that arrival has become almost unbelievable, and is arriving anyway. "I am still angry," she said against his shoulder, "about the years." "So am I." His arms around her were steady. "That does not go away because we are here now. I am not asking you to let it go. I am asking you to let me stay while you carry it." She closed her eyes. The decision didn't come that night. She did not make it in the warmth of the bond, or the relief of being held, or the particular sweetness of a moment that felt finally like something that had always been true. She made it 5 days later, standing on the cottage porch at dusk, children asleep inside, Carl beside her with the quality of stillness she had recognized the very first evening they spoke, the ability to be present without filling space he had not been given permission to fill. The valley below was going golden. The cliff road was empty. "I want to go to Thorn Vale," she said. He turned to look at her. "Not to stay," she said. "Not yet. To take the boys and show them where they come from, to let them understand what they carry in their blood, and then to decide, from a place where I actually have a real choice in front of me, what comes next." "Then we go when you are ready," he said. "Slowly. And you choose at every step. No step is decided without you." "I will," she said. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with the particular grip of someone who has been given something they will not take lightly. Steady, the present, asking for nothing she had not already offered. "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. In the morning, Wyatt was already at the kitchen stove when Carl arrived, deeply invested in an attempt at oatmeal that was going in a direction no one had planned for. The results were, by any objective measure, not promising. Isaac appeared in the doorway, surveyed the scene, and stood there for a moment with his arms at his sides. "This is going to be terrible," he said. "It is an adventure," Carl said, turning from the stove with something on the spoon that had once been oatmeal. "Adventures do not smell like this. You have not tasted it yet." "I have a nose." Wyatt dissolved into laughter, grabbed the spoon, dripped something unidentifiable on the stone floor, and showed no remorse whatsoever, while Mirabel leaned in the doorway with her hand pressed over her mouth and felt it, the specific, ordinary, completely unrepeatable rightness of this exact moment, settling into her the way the bond had settled, from the edges inward, quietly, thoroughly. They ate the oatmeal, all 4 of them, at the small kitchen table that had fit 2 children and 1 careful, solitary woman for 5 years. Slightly too crowded now, everyone's elbows touching, Wyatt talking with his mouth full about something Pearl Finch had told him, Isaac eating with the resigned thoroughness of someone completing a task he has decided to see through, Carl eating his and saying nothing about the quality of it, which was either politeness or self-preservation. Mirabel watched her family. This strange, improbable, fiercely assembled family. And felt the thing she had spent 5 years carefully not feeling open completely in her chest. Not the love. The love had never closed. The hope. The hope she had run from Thorn Vale. Keep in the dark with nothing but a shattered heart and a borrowed road, and the first cold miles of a life she did not yet know how to imagine. She had raised 2 children who were remarkable in ways she had not taught them and could not take credit for. She had made herself necessary to a town that had no obligation to receive her. She had become, in the years between that night and this morning, someone she would not trade for the girl who had stood on the edge of a ceremony at 23 and believed that someone else's choice was the source of her worth. She was worth more than that girl had known. He had searched for 5 years and found more than he had left behind. She watched him lose an argument with Isaac about whether oatmeal constituted food in any meaningful sense, and she thought, privately, and with the particular warmth of something fully believed, he understands that. She was glad. She found him with her sister, and she vanished. For 5 years, she carried the weight of something that was never real, a lie precise enough to take everything. But she also carried what no lie could touch, 2 children with their father's eyes, and a love so stubborn it had outlasted every attempt to extinguish it. He found her in a harbour town, at the edge of his maps, hollow from searching. But he found something he had not quite dared to hope for. A woman who had been through the worst the world could arrange, and had come out the other side not diminished, but deepened. Some lies are built to be permanent. Some bonds are stronger than the lies made to break them. And some stories, the ones worth telling, do not end with the running. They begin with the staying.